Because again, the question is, Cassandra Ventura claims she's a victim of sex trafficking, but why did she stay for 11 years? Why did it seem that there was evidence she was setting up these freak-offs and encouraging these freak-offs? There might be alternative explanations, and it might not be so easy for the jury just to accept she's not telling the truth. So here's the thing. I'll go to you, Joe. We have a question from Jesse K. How can there be two forensic psychologists testifying for each side? Shouldn't there be just one, i.e. the true explanation of trauma response and coping mechanisms, and not two versions of it? I mean, look, we don't know who the defense expert, we know who the defense expert's going to be. The name actually escapes me at the moment, but don't know exactly what they're going to testify to yet. But fair question. Why have so many different experts testify about this?
Joe Richardson, civil rights attorney at McHugh Law Group, getting into it once again, breaking it down, the law and common sense.
Well, my dad once told me it's better to have and not need than to need and not have. This is a complicated thing, and the prosecution knows, frankly, they have some explaining to do. There's a lot of people that might disagree with someone being in a relationship that's violent, that's abusive, etc. But everybody knows somebody that's been in that category. What they don't know is that, and what they've never thought of, and what the step that has to happen for this prosecution is that the jury's got to see that there's criminal acts involved with this happening. And so it may be that these two experts are dealing with two sides of the coin, two parts of the world, to be able to make sure that they explain everything that needs to explain. They need to explain and cover all bases, because I think there's an admission here that this is very complicated, because this is not something that people see. People are used to domestic violence. That doesn't mean that there's a criminal conspiracy. That doesn't mean that there's racketeering. That doesn't mean that there are RICO violations. So they've really got to do what they need to do to put it together, so that despite the things that Cassie was actually saying about being in love, being in a wonderful relationship, wanting to do the freak offs, etc., that they take away that voluntary element, so that what can be left over is the crime that they are alleging, the crimes that the prosecution are alleging took place here.
And put aside the fact that somebody like Cassie could arguably have agreed to this 95 times, but the 5 times she didn't agree to it, and if you're talking about the 2016 hotel incident, for example, or where she claims she was on a plane and shown videos of freak-offs and then felt trapped and then was pressured afterwards to have a freak-off with Diddy, you could say those are instances that are not consensual and make up sex trafficking. Although this is complicated, it's a gray area. And all the drugs, again, one of the underlying crimes of racketeering, possession with intent to distribute. If he's got all the drugs, so it not only goes to the narrative put forward by the prosecution that he would drug victims to keep them compliant. If you're talking about a criminal enterprise engaged in a massive amount of criminal activity, having all those drugs and the guns definitely feeds into that narrative. Joe, I'll go to you. This is from Legs7K. Legs7K has been with us, I think, for every one of the live streams. So thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for coming in and checking us out. Hi, studio. I apologize if this is wrong, but Cassie has given evidence. What about the other male who pressed charges, Lil Rod, I think? Will he be testifying, do you think? Now, he didn't press charges. He filed a lawsuit against Sean Combs. I don't believe he's going to testify, Joe, right? Because I remember in a pretrial filing, the defense had mentioned producer 1 will not be testifying. And if you read between the lines, it looked like Lil Rod. So he showed up outside of court for week 1, but I don't think he's going to be testifying, right? And if he doesn't testify, because he made racketeering allegations himself, sex trafficking allegations himself, if he doesn't testify, does that mean his claims aren't legit?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like he's going to testify, and the prosecution has to decide who's going to really help us get over the line here. And they've made a decision that that particular potential witness, there's not going to be enough happening there. The fact that somebody has filed a civil complaint with the different standards of proof, et cetera, there's 20 to 30 of those now, right? So that doesn't mean that just because they filed those things, Cassie is the one with a mountain of credibility in terms of having filed this case. And they largely based their criminal case on the things that she said in her civil case to support what they'd already done, the work that they had already done, the investigation that they'd already had. The fact that there's a whole lot of other people, whether you want to call them copycats, whether their cases are totally legit or not, they're civil cases. They're not criminal cases. And so the standard, of course, is higher. We got to go beyond a reasonable doubt. So the prosecution has to be very, very picky about who helps them put together the pieces to get over the line as it pertains to this criminal RICO matter. It's not a civil matter. This happened and it shouldn't have, because they could be true, but it doesn't mean that he's going to be convicted. And so they're making decisions about who it is that's going to testify the best, who's going to give them the most. My sense is they probably want as many women to testify as possible. I mean, I would imagine that, and just decided that that particular witness wasn't going to be one of them.
Well, I'll tell you what, one of the reasons people have so much interest in this case is the celebrity factor. Who's going to be named, who might be called as a witness. And if we're talking about a racketeering conspiracy that Combs had to agree with at least one person to further racketeering activity, illegal activity, that he had his associates and his bodyguards and his assistants help carry out crimes and cover up crimes. Here's the question from Rookie 18, Joe. Where are the rest of the people for the RICO charge?
Listen, Rookie 18 makes a wonderful, wonderful point. I never thought that ninth grade English would come in handy 30 years later. But we used to do prefixes, and you had to define the prefixes. And one is con, C-O-N. That's with or together. So there's a conspiracy, but who is he conspiring with? Even at the beginning, when RICO first started getting, using prosecutions to get mobsters, et cetera, they never prosecuted those guys alone, but prosecute a whole lot of them, then maybe get some to sell out on other ones. So it's a very fair question. But they also know that sometimes when they put too many people up in here together, you end up having problems. The Young Thug case, I think, is a perfect example of that. On the other hand, they do the same thing with R. Kelly, with just R. Kelly, even though you're alleging conspiracy in RICO. Yeah. So that's a very fair question. And on the defense side, to the point that was made before, I think some of these stars will come in and say, yeah, I was there. I never saw this or that or the other. And it reminds the jury, well, I'm not saying he's not a domestic abuser, but he's hanging out with Michael B. Jordan or with Usher or, fill in the blank, whoever it is. And it might be a little freaky, but it's not criminal. Because if it was really criminal and if it was really a conspiracy, there'd be more than just him. And so I think that's a very fair question and something that the prosecution is going to have to make sure they explain really, really well. I think this is even more of a stretch, honestly, than even the Young Thug case, where at least it's showing up in their music and those types of things. So they might have a problem that way.
It was more easily digestible that there was a gang, right? As opposed to Combs operating his businesses. I mean, he's a famous guy that could probably say, of course he's got security. Of course they have guns. Of course he's trying to protect himself. But the more like David James testifying yesterday, his former assistant, saying, it's Combs' kingdom. We got to take lie detector tests. We got to supply the rooms. Cassie Ventura talking about assistants, cleaning up after the freak-offs, tracking her location. That's what they need to get to this as a criminal enterprise. It's interesting. It's interesting. All right, we got an update from court. Dr. Hughes testifies. This is a different role. Sean Combs' defense counsel says, you have not gathered information about this case, right? I am not rendering an opinion on any individual. There's someone named Cassie, but you don't know what she said, right? I don't. You testified across the river in the Eastern District of New York, right? Right. And you say the same thing, even in the cases are different, correct? It's to help the jurors understand, but it's their job to consider their case, right? See, Joe, that's so important, right? I don't believe she was permitted to testify specifically about Cassie Ventura because she didn't examine her. She's providing these overarching concepts for the jury to understand. Is this good cross-examination?
I think it is good cross-examination because the defense, to win this case, you're going to have to do a whole lot of sideswiping. You're going to have to be able to undermine what even a credible or likable witness is saying by being able to establish, in this particular case, well, you didn't test her, so we really shouldn't be listening to you at all, right? Or that this situation is so distinguishable from what you normally dealt with, from what you dealt with before. And by the way, because it's distinguishable, but you're saying the same thing in two different cases, then you shouldn't be believed anyway. So if an unlikable witness you can attack, a witness that's not likable, you can sideswipe them and say, well, regardless of what you're saying, it doesn't really apply here for this reason, that reason, either because of something you didn't do or because something wasn't done underlying, or we're talking apples and oranges. So I think it is important from a cross-examination standpoint, because all of these witnesses that come in with something that has the potential to bear negatively on Sean Combs, particularly making the dots connect about why someone would stay in a relationship, and this becomes potentially a criminal thing, keeps him in the game for it, you've got to undermine him somehow.
The cross-examination is continuing. So Sean Combs' defense counsel asks, you don't publish data on the patients you have evaluated, do you? Dr. Hughes says it's confidential, so I can't cross-check your experience, the basis of what you're saying, right? So Joe, this is a good question from Words 789. Will Diddy's apology video be used as evidence? And that's the video came out 2 days after CNN published the 2016 footage of him appearing to beat up Cassie Ventura, where he apologized. And you wonder from a legal point of view why he did it, because he's essentially admitting it's him on the tape. It's not as if the tape was doctored. He admitted it was basically him. I don't think it's been admitted yet, right? I could be wrong, but I don't think so. And why wasn't it admitted during Cassie Ventura's testimony? Do you think it's going to be admitted?
I don't believe it has been either. And of course, the defense would fight like heck to keep it from getting in. I would argue it's more prejudicial than probative. It doesn't accomplish anything. It reminds it knocks on the door once again for the prosecution to say, jury, hey, this guy's really a criminal. But the fact of the matter is, he's acknowledging being a domestic abuser. That's what the video is about. So it's really repetitive. Once the tape came in, we know what he did. Once the tape came in, him apologizing for the tape, he's not acknowledging that he's a sex trafficker. He's not acknowledging that he should be guilty of RICO. He's not acknowledging that there's a conspiracy. He didn't say me and a bunch of other guys did it. You know what I mean? So they'll fight like heck to keep it from coming in. I'm pretty sure it's not in yet. But I would argue that it's just more redundant than anything, because it continues to knock on the door and remind the jury. They still have to make that step, though, to making it a criminal conspiracy. And the video acknowledges that he's a domestic abuser. That's why they ran to that in opening and said, we own that he's a domestic abuser and it's not cool. That's why he ran to that, because now this is redundant and doesn't add anything.
Yeah, there's not much more they can go. I mean, they can't deny what everybody sees in that video. Percentage. At this point, if you could put in percentage, will Sean Combs get convicted of something he's charged with?
I would put it at 50-50. There's something that doesn't make sense with Sean Combs. Frankly, he should have gotten convicted years ago with the Shine case. And he threw Shine under the bus. Shine did hard time. I had a conversation with my mother, and she let me know that, Joe, I'd have real concerns about this because of the passage of time. And will the person, the jury, be able to separate all of these crimes, right, the way that they need to? If they are, like what was just said, then maybe they get there at transportation, right? But I'd say 50-50 right now, because my sense is I think it could be an all or nothing proposition, because there's something about him and New York City that it may be that somebody might be there, particularly with 8 males on the jury, to hang that jury.
So Sean Combs' defense attorney says, you gave a webinar about giving expert witness testimony, right? Again, questioning Dr. Dawn Hughes. Dr. Hughes responds, yes, for battered women. Let me show you DX, and then the judge calls for a sidebar. Joe, what are you getting from the cross-examination? What is the theme of the cross-examination right now?
Yeah, I think that they want to undermine his credibility, because I think that they're going to try to show that, you're doing webinars, you're coaching battered women, you're coaching people, you're letting the jury know, you're letting the lawyers that hire you know that you're going to come in and do whatever needs to be done for this person in this category, which on some level may be true for all experts, but they want to undermine the basis and the window that he comes through. So if they can say the window that this expert witness comes through is always one that's going to support this person, despite what may be some people's notions of common sense, then they can't be trusted, because fundamentally, again, they want the defense to get back to the place, the jury to get back to the place where they would say, my first inclination is this looks voluntary and it's a long, long time. How do you get past that? So hopefully they're using that witness on the cross to flip back to that and to get back to people's notions of common sense based on their own experience. Again, this is very unusual.
There's one more question. Will Christina Coram, who, as we know, is Combs, or apparently Combs' former chief of staff, will Christina Coram be put on the stand? And if so, for the defense or for the prosecution? Joe.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I forget how that, how she was being talked about, right? I think the same thing that can make you laugh will make you cry. If she was going to be central, what the prosecution needs that they don't have. Cassie is the quote star witness, but she was in love, and a lot of times it's almost like she kind of didn't know what was going on, right? Or at least it can be perceived that way. And if that's the case, then how do you know that this isn't voluntary? How do you know this? What they need is someone in that position. And I don't know if this chief of staff would give them this information. The prosecution would do it. They would have said so probably in opening if they would. Somebody that is very clear-headed and saying, Diddy, Mr. Combs, you can't do this. I witnessed some things. I was scared to talk about him because I knew that they were wrong. He went to another place. Somebody that can really, in a clear-headed fashion, really help put the conspiracy together, put the criminal element together. If the chief of staff can do that, then yeah, I'd be looking at it. But I don't think we've heard that that's going to happen. And I would imagine that if the defense could use the chief of staff, who is somebody who is very close to things by the nature of their job, to say anything positive, I think the defense will be more likely to use that person for that very reason.
Question from Chris Buono. I'll throw it to you, Joe. How would a witness sit with the jury if they take the stand as a hostile witness and then take the fifth?
Well, that's always interesting. It actually depends on who the witness is, right? And what, the questioning attorney who's put them on as a hostile witness. So going through that scenario, that means somebody was supposed to be called or was supposed to testify way X or way Y, and they didn't, or they refused to, right? And so therefore, you're going to put them on as a hostile witness. Now they're going to take the fifth. Well, that could be good news and bad news for the prosecution, because could the jury be saying, well, prosecution, why aren't you prosecuting this person as well? And if you're looking for a hostile witness to give you what you need, that must mean that your case, as it pertains to people that are not either being called hostilely, even if they're not, excited, exuberant witnesses, that means your case isn't tight enough. You need a hostile witness, somebody that's not saying what it is that they need to, and so therefore you want to wring it out of them in order for you to get your conviction. So I think it would be a bit distracting if someone is coming on and they're not cooperating, because it might say that you took this chance because there are weaknesses in your case.
So what were all of the known evidence found during the raid? What did they find during the raids of his property? We talked about a little bit more earlier with Elizabeth. We've
talked about that some, but we've talked about, sex, drugs, rock and roll. I mean, all kinds of stuff. They found, cocaine on dollar bills. They found scratched off guns. They found things that would seem to be, that would indicate potential criminal activity.
Cell phones in the shoes?
Cell phones in shoes. Scrapped off serial numbers off of guns, right, when people want to do something using a gun and get away with it, right? And have it be under the radar. So a lot of things that may indicate there are things going on that are unseemly, right? Whole lot of high heels and shoes, a whole lot of
baby oil, personal lubricant,
a whole lot of things,
ammunition
that are the instrumentalities of the freak off, as it were. But I think it might be a little bit more powerful that the things that people traditionally associate with crimes are being found.